Hello, Oscar.
Myriam,
You just asked.
learnings. We were talking about learnings.
We're talking about learnings, the biggest learnings since the lockdown. I was just referring to springtime, that things seem to emerge and to flourish despite the crisis. I think one of my biggest learnings was that the step between the offline and the online world is not as far as big as I expected it to be. And once we have the confidence, it's actually not so difficult to create the same depth, the same connection, the same learnings virtually. And the screen sometimes just disappears.
Yeah. What happens to your big conference now? How are you reimagining that?
Never done before. At the moment, never done before became a daily ritual.
Yeah. How prophetic.
Yes, yes, it is. So at the moment, we just decided to reschedule to spring next year. On the other hand, I have a lot of ideas how to create a conference experience, a never done before conference experience, even in the online world.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this
Tell me
is still
more.
to emerge.
No. Let's speculate together. Come on. What does the edge of your jigsaw puzzle look like for this never before done online experience? It's the thought I've had on my mind since you sent me the email, since probably 4 weeks ago. I was like, wow, your imagination plus the current situation, I can see something spectacular happening here.
What do you mean? What did you imagine?
Whatever that time frame was where you got a whole bunch of clever people from all around the world together, it was like, yeah, you've rescheduled the physical event. And my hope was that you keep the time and use that to create, play with the time and the space, and reimagine that in electronic form. And I'm just wondering, as the earth threw your jigsaw puzzle box up in the air and all the pieces fell down differently, how you put that jigsaw puzzle together in a different way.
And it's interesting what you're saying, because sometimes it seems as if the teacher arrives whenever the student is ready. So due to the crisis and when I had to reschedule my mastermind, I met one of the participants who helped me to put it online. And we are at the moment partnering up and building the virtual side of workshopswork. And with this new piece in my professional life, so many things now become possible that I always thought were impossible, at least for me. Like hosting a never done before digital conference. So I can see the pieces already falling together. And then, yeah, I think it's a question of priority. So the idea was to create this sort of haute couture fashion show of facilitation, right? So where we experience things that we might not do under normal circumstances, but they will inspire us to create the new normal. And I wonder whether for this to happen in the virtual world and really to give the contributors the chance to present something that they've never done before and that will be so inspiring, I think we all need maybe also some more time of experimentation, because at the moment we're doing the never done before on a small scale. I think we can do it on a big scale, but it might take some time to grow.
Or you can run more regular experiments for the group in between, you know. I'm sure as the models go down the catwalk, that's not the first time they walk down the catwalk. They must do a rehearsal.
It's true, but it's the first time they're showing the specific dress.
Yeah, but they're still rehearsing.
That's true. That's true.
If you created that platform for us, that could create something even more magical than waiting.
Which brings a word to my mind, a German word that's called Vorfreude. And I think it's something very German. It's pre-joy. It's something you build up, a joy you build up while waiting for a big event. And I think that's the reason why the Germans are not very spontaneous, because they nurture this Vorfreude. If something is spontaneous, then you basically take away this process of pre-joy. So these smaller rehearsals could build up pre-joy and excitement.
If you ask the group, how many do you think would be open to an experiment where we could be their audience and we could swap roles, and then they could be our audience and we could experiment in all kinds of different ways then?
The question is, who would not be open for that?
Beautiful.
Would you?
So, of course. Of course. I'm kind of imagining myself in high heel shoes, in no shoes, in all kinds of different outfits to keep the fashion show metaphor going. And your question stimulates my mind to go, what haven't I been brave enough to try that I could try in this environment? And I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to experiment.
My neurons are firing.
I'm noticing from the way your eyes are flicking.
Yeah, I always look in a corner when I'm thinking.
Stay there. Don't rush it.
Because then sometimes I was just listening to a podcast episode that I recorded with Colleen Panier about video game design and what we can learn from video game design about workshop design. And she is sharing these little challenges and frictions that you add in a video game or in any game, because otherwise it's boring. Yeah. So I got curious about the opposition between being a facilitator who makes things easy and a video game designer who voluntarily puts friction into the process. So in this experimentation or rehearsal process, maybe you don't have to find the challenge, but the group can find the challenges.
Yeah. If there's a community site, we could throw the ingredients into the possible recipe. That would be interesting. Yeah. Tension, progress, and recognition. If you get a chance to have a look at Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk on game design, that will extend your orientation as well. Because I think the friction of the current state that we find ourselves in has created so many different positive, imaginative approaches. So if you could curate that and architect that, I think you're going to create something that hasn't been done before.
the goal of the game.
Maybe I can invite you to create a simultaneous game. So one of my biggest frustrations, and I don't know if it's still true, but Xbox doesn't talk to PlayStation. But imagine if it did. Imagine you could play everybody, not just the ones that are on your platform. I'm wondering if you and Leanne got together and did something really amazing and joined both of your communities, what would be possible then?
Yeah, this could be something very interesting indeed.
And I don't see you as Xbox versus PlayStation, but I think joining together, and maybe there's somebody who's like that on the time zone that represents the Americas, and what could a 24-hour challenge look like? And everyone could pick and play with different times as well.
Yeah. And that's another learning from the crisis, the value of collaboration. Because in the home office, remote, you cannot solve, it's so much more difficult to work by yourself without collaborating. Because nobody will realize that you struggle, tap on your shoulder and ask if you need help. You have to reach out.
I wonder if there's game design there where you can have a little game where you signal your current status and tap required, or anyone who want to come and play for 15 minutes to broaden my perspective on this problem I'm trying to progress.
Yeah, this is still something that I'm longing for. It's like an open room, an open Zoom room where you can just step in at any time and there might be a possibility to have a random encounter, because to replicate randomness in the virtual space is quite difficult. And it's actually the random encounters that usually inspire us.
Sounds like one of the challenges for the community group when we all get together to play this global game.
Yeah. I'm up for the challenge.
It's remote randomness.
Random
remoteness.
Random remoteness. I think that's the situation we're in right now, right?
I'm really optimistic about how you'll develop this idea now. And equally, this experiment was probably not what we were supposed to be exploring today. You might have had a different conversation in mind, which I'm totally okay with too.
I was ready to let the conversation emerge.
Yeah. I think your audience really wants to hear more of your voice. And less of your interview.
I'm not so sure about that. I think what I get positive feedback is about is the way how I ask the question and get the best out of my guests.
And
build on their content. I don't know.
So do you want to flip the roles today?
That's not what I suggested. I think it's nice to just have a conversation and not just being in the asking question seat, but having no agenda, no scripted questions, no topic. And learning with and from each other.
Yeah. So 2 weeks ago, I did a 2-hour workshop completely online. and breakout rooms and virtual whiteboards and trying completely to replicate a physical experience. And I know everybody enjoyed it and was very engaged. The meeting started with 14 people logging in, but only 7 webcams being turned on.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started to acknowledge the people with webcams, not by saying, it's great you got your webcam on, I simply highlighted the congruence or lack of it between what they were saying and how they were saying it. And I think in gently nudging that, it was like a flicker of a flame moving on to a candle, to another candle, and as all the webcams came on, we got to 13.
Nice.
And I wasn't worried that I didn't get to 14. And yet my head hurt so much when I got off and completed this 2-hour session. I literally lay down on this floor, went to my bed and put a pillow over my head just to block out any sensory sensation. And what I'm wondering is, what's your experience like holding the space with a webcam and a microphone, and you're facilitating software and you're looking around the room and you're holding the space and
reading the chat, making sure that the technicalities work. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and make sure you press the record button and jump into the breakout rooms and
hydrate yourself and listen to the unsaid and the mimic and the energy.
Yeah. How do you process that? How do you come out of that space? Like for me, it probably took 15 minutes. I could tell there were completely new synaptic connections being lit up in my mind while all this was going on. And my head hurt. It really hurt. And it wasn't from hydration because, as you know, I'm always drinking water. And what's it like for you?
I think the longest virtual workshop I did was 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Or 4. We had a 20 minutes break in between. And I think a break, really, okay, turn your camera off, turn your microphone off, try to go outside and come back. This helps. I do realize that I need to be much more focused, especially navigating through the virtual whiteboard and still having all the pictures and to see, okay, are the people actually with me? If you don't get the nudges, and sometimes if everyone is concentrated and focused on navigating with this new tool, they stop speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I tried to put instructions also on the template. I use Mural so that all the different types of learners and information absorbers find a way to get into the game. So some need to hear instructions, others need to read them. Others might be distracted and then they only hear half of it.
Yeah. Well, we had children in the workshop. How do you deal with that? Have
Children?
Because a lot of people have school shut down in our part of the world. So there's children in the workshops as well. So I'll tell you how I dealt with it. I kind of waved to the children and said hello to the children and asked the people if they're okay to introduce their children to the rest of the group. And it created a much more connected experience. And the person who did the introduction seemed to be a lot more relaxed than other sessions I've been in, where they're literally saying to the children, you know, no, I'm in a call, and the kids obviously might or might not understand depending on how old they are. And I had someone in that group who was living with their parents, and the same thing happened. And the parents thought it was really funny that they were working on the video. At least that's what they said on the workshop. So I'm curious, how would you play with that tension?
I love the anecdote or the story you're sharing, because I think the beauty of this remote work and having video calls in our private environment allows us to share a side of us that we usually don't share. So you literally get a glimpse into the other person's life, and you see the person. And you get clues about what's around them that could give you additional information, make them more human. So I think it's a nice way to create this psychological safety in the workshop environment. And I think I imagine it very difficult for parents, and no, especially for the children actually, to recognize that the parents are working although they're at home, because in the normal setting, usually the parents go away, so they're unavailable. And when they're home, they're available. So now we're putting the children into a situation where they have to cognitively understand that the parents, although they're physically there, they're not available. And I think that's quite difficult. And then to invite the children and share with them what's happening, they might get a better sense of, okay, mommy, daddy are busy. I just wave hello, I get my attention, but then I can also go away without feeling rejected. Because as soon as the conference call ends, your child might still feel rejected. And that's something you want to deal with. And I think and I'm just thinking out loud, because from what I hear, what you're saying is this became now part of the responsibility of the facilitator, of what happens after the call is over. And you want the participants to step out of the call and still be in a good place, and not to deal with parents who feel rejected, children who are crying, or whatsoever. So I think it's a very nice way how you dealt with it.
Yeah, it was a different call where I was working with someone in a one-on-one basis, setting up for a meeting. And I noticed that I had some beautiful art, and I asked them, you know, what's the artwork behind them? And they said, oh, I went to Mexico for 3 months to learn Spanish, but I didn't learn very much Spanish. But I met this fantastic woman who was a Mexican artist, and, you know, this is her art. And 15 minutes later, he finished telling me the story about this artist and what he admired in her art and all of that, which became a lovely parallel for him to go and ask him the question, if she was in this workshop, what would she bring to the workshop? And that created a really different perspective for him about what he called the craft of art, that you sometimes need to take your time and let the painting settle, the way he explained it. It's like, sometimes you start, you leave, you come back, and it looks different to when you're creating the first time. And I said, well, we're probably going to get that experience here. And it prompted him to speculate with me that what are the rules of engagement when we do this as a group in a room. You might say no phones in a room. You might say be on time. how do they translate then into the virtual world? So I put a very small survey out. Well, I say small. The responses was not small, about what gets in the way of people listening during video conferences. And by far the biggest response was kids. The second response was bandwidth, connectivity, all those kinds of things. And then the third one was visually distracting backgrounds. And yet, if we put rules in place, you know, whether webcams are on or off or all of that, we don't acknowledge that everybody there's an adult and can make a choice. So we decided we will just play with the space and let it emerge. And it worked. And why I ask the question to you is that right now, structure, sequence are helpful to people when they are dealing with unfamiliar environments. And what practices do you think would be productive for groups to come into that space? Not that we mimic the physical environment, but know that there's a cultural expectation that there is some kind of parallel between what we experience online and what we experience offline.
I think there are several layers to that. At least that's how I hear it. One is how to actually start the workshop. Because there are a few awkward moments in the virtual that don't appear in the offline environment, is when everyone drops into a call. And you start a conversation, and then someone comes in, and then more and more people come in, and then you have usually this awkward silence, because you cannot really start a conversation or continue a conversation with people coming in and still letting them feel welcome.
Yeah. Did you notice I played a song?
Yeah.
That's how I've kind of played with it.
Yeah, because then you have something to focus. You're in the space together, even without words. And this makes it really comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, that came from a suggestion from one of the participants. But I interrupted. Please continue.
I think that's a wonderful solution to the problem, because if you listen to music, you don't have to speak. I think another way would just be to let everyone wait in the waiting room and to start on time and welcome everyone in together at the same time. Just to reduce this awkwardness.
Can you play music in the waiting room?
I don't think so. Would be worth an email to the Zoom development team.
There you go. So we wait in the waiting room and then we come in. And then what about protocols? How do we talk about them as facilitators in this space?
I recently made the experience. I recorded I could not resist. As part of a large virtual conference, I invited for a Fishbowl conversation. So I said, whoever wants to join is invited. We're going to record and it will be broadcasted as a podcast episode. 73 people showed up. So beforehand, I took the time to think of a structure and a protocol on how to manage this group so that they won't speak at the same time, so that nobody interrupts each other. So I said, okay, please mute yourself and then raise your hand and use the chat. And then I suddenly was in the role that I pre-designed for myself, where I had to call up people. Oh, now you can speak, now you can speak. And I felt so uncomfortable in this role that I given myself. So after half an hour, I said, you know what? Let's try the experiment. Please, everyone, unmute yourself and feel into the room, into the virtual room, and speak whenever you have the impression that it's your turn to speak. And it worked. And the conversation went deeper. It was more dynamic. Participants were yes-anding each other. And I think it happened twice that two spoke at the same time. So I did not edit this out because I thought it's nice to see that it happens and how the group reacts to it. So to come back to your question, I think that's, again, it's a learning that we know from the offline facilitation, that it's about trust. It's about standing there and being instead of doing. So I think if we give this extra amount of trust to the group that they can handle it, then it will pay off in terms of quality and depth. So to come back to the protocol, I think it's important to raise awareness that any distraction, any noise can distract the group, and that whether you want to have a virtual environment or not, that this kind of sends a signal. And I get it that some people, maybe they don't want to show their environment, their personal background, because one reason or another. But just to raise awareness that it impacts.
Two people in our group had these virtual backgrounds, which also became an interesting conversation about how they design their virtual backgrounds and that. What about the opposite? What about checking out of the meeting? How to leave the spaces?
I must admit that I always did it in the same way as I would check out from a normal workshop. And if it gets too big, then have small group checkouts in breakouts. But otherwise, everyone sharing one word in a popcorn format, or sharing their reflections on how they check out of the meeting. What are your experiences?
Well, I asked the group how they would like to check out. I probably asked the group if they would like to check out in another case. I think the checkout became fairly simple, much quicker than in the face-to-face environment. And as a facilitator, what I was thinking about in the checkout is it my role to create a break for them, not only in the checkout from the space they're in, but how they transition from this space of embutu, of connectedness, to a space that they might go to if they live by themselves, where they're disconnected, to a space where they go into where the kids are running around the house. And I'm just speculating without any answers about where does our role finish in helping them to transition to the next space.
That's a very interesting and important thing you're raising. The Fishbowl, for instance, I finished with a few seconds of silence to just reflect on what happened and to find this inner closure and get prepared for the time after. Even for myself as a facilitator, it's kind of, it becomes, and I live by myself. So as soon as the workshop is closed, I turn off Zoom, and then this afterglow that you usually have while debriefing with someone, or just kind of, I don't know whether celebrating is the right word, but there's some energy left after the workshop, and then suddenly to be there, to sit there by myself with all this energy. True, and for participants, it might be exactly the same, or the opposite when their kids are running around.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
Lots of fun stuff to us to play with on this global intergalactic fashion runway experiment, isn't there?
Mm.
I think at the moment, if we think about being under attack by an exponential threat, I think network connections that are horizontal rather than power connections which are vertical or hierarchical. That's why I think your never been done before experiment to create these linkages around the world will create some amazing outcomes, and ones that I can't imagine for sure, and for other participants as well. But the other side of it will be worth it. So I would invite you to be really ambitious with this.
Always. And I know that I have a mentor on the other side of the world.
Oh, you have a cheerleader, my friend. I'm not a mentor.
Now, how do I get this picture of the cheerleader in high heels walking down the catwalk out of my head?
Yeah, you never know. You never know. That might spark a different thought altogether about possibilities with imagination, but more importantly through collaboration.
Totally. I think it's a chance for the world to really flatten in terms of hierarchies, because we realize much more how we depend on the skills of others, of complementary skills and teamwork, and command and control doesn't work any longer.
Well, it's interesting. At Christmas, I read this book called The Tower and the Square, which maps the history of the ebb and flow of hierarchies and networks, and how the inevitable rise of a network will create the rise at some point of a hierarchy, which will then be taken down by a network, which will then be taken over by a hierarchy. And the book was written by a British professor who's written many historical books, but it's available on PBS on YouTube. The full episodes they've turned the book into this public broadcast TV show called Networld, and talks about when hierarchies get too high and too strong and too powerful, they inevitably stimulate networks, and when networks become too fragmented and too disconnected, they inevitably encourage hierarchies. So definitely one to think about, that the natural outcome of a network is a hierarchy, and the natural outcome of a hierarchy is a network. It's a very fluid thing.
I can see that. And as long as you take the learnings from the network that got the network into the stage of hierarchy, and vice versa. So there's a constant learning loop. So what kind of fragmentation and chaos led to the urge to organize in a hierarchy? And what kind of power structures and frictions got the network to take over again?
And we see that in workshops all the time. This constant interplay of the network versus the hierarchy.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm intrigued.
People speak differently to people based on their power title or the role they show up into the workshop. And some people don't. Some people will come into the workshop and treat capital L leaders the same way they would treat a family member at the dinner table. And you watch these waves like on a beach going in and out and ebbing and flowing. And there's even another layer on that. There's waves and then there's the tidal flow. As the beach goes back and the beach goes forward, during the workshop, you see those tensions accentuated where people who are very differential to the power continue to do so, and people who are comfortable with speaking across the network continue to do so. And it creates tension for both. And that's the spicy recipe we deal with in a workshop about balancing and surfing across these water that has different heights and different powers and different tempos. And like all swimmers or surfers would know, you can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
You can play with it, you can dance across the top of it, but trying to stop it is pretty pointless.
So what can you do as a facilitator to help the group to play with it?
For me, it's always a question of, is it productive for them at the moment, as opposed to, do they need to play with it at all? Should we acknowledge it in the room? Should we have a noticing exercise to bring it to the surface? I think that's where there's the comfort of the facilitator to play with the tension of, is this tension mine or is this tension theirs?
Mm.
And then is this tension theirs useful or is it counterproductive? And we can never judge, only they can. Because sometimes it's the deliciousness of holding that space for long enough to let the tension explode, expand, take a different path. And yet, as a facilitator in that moment, if we can't be comfortable with the tension, we try and do something to activate it or deactivate it. And we give up our power in that moment because the power's with the group always. And for me, that's the hard bit of the noticing when we're doing this via video, because you can sense this dynamic in the room as simply as, where are people sitting? It doesn't happen when you come in from a waiting room onto, all those video cameras. Nor do people are very much more conscious of the way their facial expressions emerge when they're listening to somebody, which they are definitely more comfortable with rolling their eyes in a room, where they're not necessarily comfortable rolling their eyes online. So there's this really interesting space we have to see where the and is rather than the or in online offline now. And practical clothing versus high fashion.
I'm still with your thought of the facial expressions.
Mm.
And I recall a study that I read that if we try to concentrate, so when we're reading a book, usually you can see it in our facial expressions, and we rarely look pretty when we really focus.
Myriam's frowning, by the way.
We do have a video at this time.
Oh, excellent.
So I think it's funny. So when I recall student time sitting in the library, and then I am reading, I'm studying, but then I want to look pretty, early 20s, right? And then I realized that I just turned the pages without having recognized the content.
Hmm.
So I wonder what the impact is on our presence and focus on the workshop content if we're constantly reminded of our facial expressions just by the fact that we do see our video.
Hmm.
And then if a call is large enough, you can just swipe and have the mosaic of pictures without your own video. This could help.
Hmm.
But then on the other hand, you also want to be aware of your facial expressions because it triggers something in others.
Yeah.
So I think this is indeed a puzzle.
Something we'll all evolve and discover together.
Mm. Or just to put some ease in facial expressions, I learned the face dance from Mary Alice Arthur. So to start with their face dance together at the beginning of a video conference.
Which would work really well with music.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you share a laugh, you share a little bit of humiliation, collective humiliation. And it puts everyone maybe at ease. I love exercise that flatten the room in the beginning.
Hmm.
So I think this kind of weird facial expressions brings the child side in us and the humanness, and then flattens hierarchies a little bit, assuming that everyone joins.
So how should we finish up today?
What are your reflections on this experimental call conversation?
I see the possibilities like explorers discovering a new planet. I see this as your opportunity to go past Mars and see what's beyond Mars as a planet. I sense you were surprised when 74 people turned up for a fishbowl. I'm curious what that is on a global scale across 3 time zones and what that will unleash. I sense that you, like these great scientists that discovered nuclear power in splitting the atom and releasing energy in creating this space. And what you'll create is multi-generational, multi-continental, interplanetary. I can see nothing but possibilities, and with no precision whatsoever, yet so many possibilities by what you mentioned about connecting now. Because there's a latent energy that people want to release in this moment through their connection with others, that you can create this platform for all of us to bring our best there. So we're here to help you. Well, what would you like to ask the audience about this?
I would love to ask the audience. I herewith ask the audience, tell us what you think. I also realized that it's difficult to stay in communication with the audience, which is so abstract. And to really have a distributed conversation through a medium that is the podcast or now the video. Food for thought.
There could be good things in abstraction and distribution, though.
Totally, totally. And I think that something that you mentioned earlier about the workshop space, and I don't recall the exact context. But I think what is nice now with the virtual space is that we can keep the space open for longer. And we don't have, we don't have to necessarily be in the same call to collaborate. So the opportunity for asynchronous work, because the sticky notes won't fall off the wall. This is a space that I would like, that I will for sure explore more, how to use this opportunity of an open workshop space where you can digest, this is what you meant, what you refer to give people the opportunity to reflect on what happened and then step in again. And I think this is possible now with the virtual collaboration tools.
Yeah. My friend Jane Anderson ran a 2-day workshop. She had 500 people registered, maximum 320 or 380 turned up at any one time, and ran a series of sprints over that 2-day period. And what she created was extraordinary, not just for herself, but for this community that had been part of her network for a long time. And I wasn't able to jump into the space for anything other than 3 different 30-minute sessions. And that's what sparked the possibility for you to do something on a global scale. She had, in the morning, she had people from the east coast of the USA and the west coast, and then as she moved across, and she was welcoming people from India and Pakistan and London and Germany and Austria, and moving over to the US. And at the end, I think she ran 12-hour days. I'm sure she was completely exhausted. And her reflection was, if she did this again, she would partner with others to make it work. So I've seen a bit of what's possible with that, and your community is passionate, energetic, and creative. So maybe a simple question we can ask them is this something that you would do during the week or do during the weekend as a starting point, maybe as an invitation to make, in game theory, we want to make some progress. And that might be the simplest question we can ask is, is it something we would do on a weekend or during the week? Yes. And the answer could be both. It can be designed, but that might be the invitation we put out to you. So how can people contact you and tell you about weekend or weekday or both?
Yeah, that's a very low entry level. And also to ask for commitment or for interest. Thank you, Oscar, for your continuous encouragement.
It's my pleasure. I'm enjoying the fact that I'm in 8 time zones away and able to work with you synchronously and asynchronously all the time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for your time.